In this video, I'll show you how we installed these living room lights and these entryway lights. And those require the installation of this 2-gang light switch box. So in this video, I'll show you how we gained access to the attic, located a lighting circuit to tie into, laid out and then installed the lights, then how we wired them, and finally, how we installed the light switches. And I go into a lot of detail in this video. It was a lot of work, and I really hope this helps you out with your own project. And not all of this went as smoothly as we had hoped. And honestly, this morning I was like, this is gonna be a great one-day project.
It still might be, Dan, don't give up. Okay, so the problem with the room, you walk in the front door, there's no switch for any kind of light in the room. None of the outlets are switched. Even if you have a lamp, you can't walk in the door and turn on a light. So we want to put ceiling lights in and switches.
These are the dimmers we got for the light switches. And we got 250 feet of 14-2 cable. And for the ceiling lights, we have these 6-inch downlights. And for the entryway lights, we have 2 of these 4-inch ones. And the lights can be set to one of 5 different color temperatures with this switch. Ooh, free hat. This video is not sponsored, by the way, but Steve is wearing the bling. Before we start doing anything in the living room, we need to make sure we can get into the attic above it. Okay, so here we are in the garage, which has access to the attic. And that's where the living room is, but it has some drywall up in the way. So we're gonna have to cut through that. So while we're up here in the attic, we're gonna put on some masks because there is insulation and we could already feel the dust a bit, so we're gonna play it safe.
Let's see, how could we cut it so we could put it back?
So we used a stud finder to mark the location of the wood behind the drywall, and then used an oscillating tool to cut the drywall down each stud and remove the 1 nail remaining. There we go. Should I just break it?
Yep.
Or pull it out?
Yep. Oh, there you go.
Luckily, I had a lot of plywood in my attic for when I insulated it. So I took some down, brought it to Steve's, and we used these 2-foot by 8-foot long pieces of plywood. Can we get him up there?
Probably not.
To span the joists of his ceiling so that we could move around more safely. All right, we wrestled one in position. Okay, I haven't fallen through yet. And it's hard to tell because of all the insulation, but the ceiling joists are 2x6s, I believe, which are running left to right in this frame. Okay, Steve's moving that second piece in, making our plywood highway. And then you probably want to have it overlap a little bit on the end of this one.
Okay, so if we look outside and see where relative to that peak the front door is, I'm sure we're close.
Going into the attic there, and there's that peak of the roof, and there's the living room where we're gonna add the lights. So we're right there. And here, Steve has found the cables that go down into the wall and to the light switches near the front door. And we also found some old knob and tube wiring up in that area. So we wrestled in a 3rd piece of plywood to get easy access to the top of that wall where the cables go down to the switches. Little did we know, our plan was about to be foiled. This is just a 1-gang box that just happens to have 3 switches, and these are all for outdoor switches. So in order to have a separate light switch for the lights in the living room, and then lights in the entryway, we're gonna have to remove this and put in a 3-gang box. So taking out the faceplate will be very safe, but do be aware that there are oftentimes screw terminals right past that you could possibly touch and shock yourself on. And this handy voltage tester, when it lights up solidly, reveals that there is in fact a live circuit at this light switch. And long story short here, we end up spending about the next 2 hours trying to figure out what all the circuit breakers in his panel did. This is labeled so badly. Finally! With that circuit off, we were finally able to pull out the light switch to see what we're working with. Only one white one coming in. Interesting. And to play it safe, I tested all the wires with the voltage tester again. And here with it flashing, it's just letting you know that the device itself is on. Okay, so there's some knob and tube wire back there, and that one is live, unfortunately. And that one is not. Once we found the right breaker for it, we were able to cap it off with a wire nut. Since he got the house, Steve has been wondering what this middle switch does. And it turns out it's nothing because there's not even a wire going to it. So unfortunately, that's concrete in there. And that's why this little junction box has been cut short. There's no back on it. because this is the cinder block wall. Our plans are gonna have to change. So we're putting this back together because we don't want to dig in the cinder block and concrete wall. And so the new plan will be to put it somewhere on this wall to the right. So we found that pretty much every light in this house was on this one 15 amp circuit, which was labeled laundry lighting, by the way. So there's one of the lights in the circuit in the hallway. So we can go up into the attic. And there's some electrical boxes right in that area. So we turn the lighting circuit off, and our handy voltage tester shows that these cables are off as well. Steve flipped the breaker back on, and our voltage tester shows that these cables are live again, and so are part of our lighting circuit. And that circuit is on a 15 amp breaker, which means we can use the 14-2 romex cable we bought because that is rated for 15 amps. And the 14 here refers to the gauge or the size of each wire, or conductor as they're called, in the cable. And perhaps a bit counterintuitively, the larger the number, the smaller the wire. And the 2 means that there are 2 insulated conductors or wires in the cable. And on this one, you can see it says with ground, so there's a third uninsulated ground wire in this cable. And while we're at it, the NM means non-metallic, and that it doesn't have a metallic casing around the cable. And the B means that the insulation is good for up to 90 degrees Celsius. Had this circuit been on a 20 amp breaker, we could not have used this 14-2 cable because the breaker would not have been able to protect this cable from carrying too much current. And that means it could get too hot and potentially start a fire. Instead, we would have had to use this yellow 12-2 romex cable because that can handle 20 amps of current. And so you might be wondering, how much current does each of these new light fixtures draw? Well, here in the box, you can see that they are the equivalent of a 60-watt incandescent bulb, but I had to look online to see that each one of these draws about 10 watts of power. And since power is simply the voltage in volts times current in amps, we can calculate that each of these bulbs draws about 0.08 of an amp. That means that theoretically, we could have 180 of these lights on this one 15 amp circuit.
Okay, so talking about placement of where we want to put the four ceiling lights, we're thinking in line with the columns of the window to kind of center it within the room. And then the fireplace hearth, maybe use the edges of the fireplace as the location. So you'd square in between the 2 columns in the windows and the 2 edges of the hearth.
Up here we can see the joists run left to right. And so they're gonna be running left to right in the living room as well. So we'll have to try and get the lights to fit, between some set of joists. So we know the joists are running this way, so we're gonna use the stud finder and try and find where those joists are. And while editing this, I learned that these lights are actually designed to span a joist. So you can try that out if the joists are interfering with your ideal light layout. So we located 3 of them in the vicinity of each column in the window, so we could better figure out where the lights would go. All right, so there are our joists above that column, and here are joists above that one. And Steve had the great idea to tape paper plates to the ceiling so we could better see where the lights would go. Instead of completing this project today, all we've done is tape some plates to the ceiling. That's too far, I think.
Roughly. That's sort of in line with the end of the fireplace.
I kind of feel like it'd look better one further forward, actually, closer to the TV. Because then, imagine having the hallway ones.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, is they're going to be, but I don't know, we'll see. Right about there.
Yeah, I feel like they should go forward one more towards the TV. Don't you?
Probably. Is that about right?
There. But yeah, to me that feels like, hey, this is a room. And then lights here would be like...
separates over here. Yeah.
For the hallway, we measured that wall and the location of the 2 lights along it. So that's if we divided those lights evenly on this wall. Happy with that layout plan, we used the ruler and the stud finder to more precisely find the exact location of each light. And we marked the center of each light with a push pin. And of course, we did the same thing for the hallway lights. So unfortunately, this hole saw doesn't get big enough, so we're just gonna have to use this compass
trace a circle on the ceiling, and cut it out with a saw. Later that night, we found the templates as we were recycling the boxes. But of course, the compass works just fine, so we drew circles for the 6-inch and the 4-inch lights on the ceiling.
So we're gonna drill some holes in the centers of our circles, and then we're gonna poke these sticks through, and that way when we go up in the attic, we can see where these are, and then clear out the insulation before we cut the larger hole to fit the light. I bet it's the walkway.
And it seems we hit the existing walkway running along the ventilation in the attic.
We can still put it there. We'll find it.
And then on the other side of the room,
that sounds like our boards.
That's our new one.
so on this side of the room, the sticks were running into the bottom of our plywood walkway.
Room of sticks.
That looks funny.
Back up in here. Okay. There are the sticks for the hallway light. There's one of those sticks. There's the other. Okay, so now we want to move all this insulation away from the area of this hole so that when we cut it, it doesn't all fall on our face and into the living room. So that's plenty of room for one of the 4-inch lights.
And doing the same again for the other.
So we've had to move our little walkways, and Steve is going downstairs to push one of those bamboo sticks up further so we can see where it is. Where is it gonna pop up? Oh, it's right there.
So we cleared out that insulation, found the next one, and did the same again.
So if that one's there, the other one should be here, probably right underneath this walkway.
So I put the camera down and cleared out insulation from underneath the walkway to reveal our little stick.
And there's the other one.
Okay, I really just need to buy a proper drywall saw so that this step could be a lot easier. But this is what I had at the time, so this is what we're using.
Oh my gosh, my shoulders are burning.
Yeah.
And then my arms get so tight.
So we kept at this for the next 5 holes, and we did realize we can make it a bit easier by drilling a big hole to start the saw in.
Is that a better starting method? Yes.
We also considered cutting from above, up in the attic, but we were worried that might make the paint chip like this more often.
We can probably glue this back.
And of course, the wood from the existing walkway in the attic is in the way to cut at least 2 of these holes in the living room. And we did try using a piece of tape to prevent that circle from falling down, but it didn't always work.
Did I cut the hole accurately?
As you can see, putting in these lights is pretty easy.
Looks pretty good.
On this particular light, we already had the power supply attached, so Steve pushed it up through the hole first, before getting that light to snap into position.
That's very cool.
So of course, we did this with all 6 of the lights.
This one might need a little work. Oh wait, there we go.
And here's one of the 6-inch lights in place. With all the lights up, now we really need to figure out where we're going to put the switches. Steve decided he wanted the switches as far right as possible on this wall, so now we're locating the studs.
Okay, so that's the stud right there.
Yep.
So like that.
Yeah.
So we located 3 studs, and Steve decided he wanted the light switches between these 2. Here we're measuring the distance between that entryway light and the section of the wall between the studs we want to get into.
So we need to be able to get 26 inches over from where this stick pokes out to be able to get into that chamber of the wall.
Okay.
So now we need to find the top of that wall in the attic.
Here is a 2x8, it appears, that forms the top of that entryway wall. So we're gonna have to go through 2 pieces of 2x4 here, I think.
Okay.
Is my theory.
I didn't get a shot of it, but we measured from the center of our entryway light
Uh-oh. Was that magic smoke coming out of my drill?
and decided to drill a 3/4 inch hole, which should be plenty big for 3 cables, 1 for the power and 1 for each of the 2 sets of lights.
Oh, that's going really deep. So I'm just gonna go very little at a time. We're hoping we don't lose this drill bit as we try and get through this very thick header of this wall. Oh, yes!
We through?
We made it!
Holy crap.
That was deep. Now that we've drilled a hole through the header of this wall, we know we can get into this section of it. And so now we're gonna measure out where to put this 2-gang junction box. Steve is gonna measure how high up from the ground this switch box is.
49.5.
Then it was just a matter of measuring out the dimensions of the electrical box and drawing out some level and plumb lines where we need to cut. And yes, we're still trying to use this saw.
It's almost there. There you go.
You know, the saw would work.
Oh, do you want to do that?
Yes.
So just like in math class, we showed you the hard way first, and now we'll show you the easy way. But maybe you want to try with one corner in a bit more. Is that easier? Oh, let's see if we can save it. Nicely done. Perfect. So now we'll want to string the 3 cables down through here, and then get them into the box, and then push it in.
Okay.
So here is a very simple diagram showing how we want to connect all the living room lights to the light switch in the wall. And I'm going to start off by showing you how to wire in the last light here in this circuit, which you can see only has 1 cable coming out of it going to the next light. And the next 3 lights here each have 2 cables coming out of their junction boxes. So I'll show you how to make those connections as well. And finally, the second cable from the last light will push down into the wall towards our light switch. So let's get into the details.
All right, so the first step is we'll take out one of these little knockouts and then bend the box a little bit. So I'll just straighten that. Now we'll put in one of these little strain reliefs. And this has a little nut on the back. And then you push it through this side. Then you put the nut on the inside. There we go. Sometimes I find it easier to get the last tightened bit just by turning the outside because it has more grip. Well, for your hands rather than that teeny little nut. Okay. I'm gonna take off the insulation to about there. So we have plenty to work with inside the box. And it'll still have the insulation to clamp onto there. I just nibble away at this outer sleeve. And then usually you can bend it around and slip off the rest. Then there's a layer of paper. You just rip that off. And then there's another layer of paper around the ground wire, and you can cut that off. So here we have our hot, ground, and neutral wires. And we'll be connecting these to these wires with these little wire nuts. So we need to strip off a little bit of this insulation, and we have some wire strippers to do that. This is 14 gauge wire. So we find the 14 gauge wire hole there. There we go. Now we just thread it through here. So I have it so that the insulation is right there, and then we can just tighten this down. And now with the strain relief in, even if you tug on this cable, it's not going to affect the connection inside the box. So we'll bend these wires out so we can work with them more easily. And then what I like to do, this is a smaller wire and it's more flexible. So I'm going to actually strip a little bit more of the insulation off. That might be a 16. Let's try. There we go. And then I wrap it around the other wire clockwise, like the same way that you're going to screw the wire nut on. Twist them together. And these might be a little long, but let's give it a try. Yeah, so we need to cut a little bit off because that's showing a little bit of the wires still. We'll cut a little bit of that length off and then screw that wire nut on. There we go. So those are nicely twisted together, and we can lay those inside out of the way. And we just go to the next pair, the neutral. We'll probably have to cut a little bit of that length off. There we go. Those are twisted together. Lay that down on the box. And then we have our ground wire, which is already bare. So we'll just take that off, wrap it around a bunch of times, and then we'll put that on. Okay, so we have that all connected up. And then of course we can still select the color of the light with that little switch in there. So our first box, which is the last in the series, is ready to connect to the light. So connect that, paying attention to the key.
Here's a still from another video I did where you can clearly see the key I'm talking about and the groove on the other side of the connector that it needs to align with. And the outer sleeve of one screws on to the other.
There we go.
And finally, I'm just using the box to figure out where to put a couple screws to hold it up on this joist.
Then make it easy having it open on one end. Boom.
Now I'm just measuring out enough cable to go from one light to the next. And it's always better to have a little bit too much than too little.
So we'll just cut it here. That should be enough.
Here I'm just pulling out the second light's power supply so we can work with it. Wiring up the second living room light is very similar to the first one, but we do have two cables coming into this box, so I'll show you what I did differently here.
This time we're going to use some WAGO connectors, because that'll be easier, because we're going to be joining two cables and the wires inside here together. And so these just hinge open like that. You can put the wire in and close it down on it. So it's much easier to undo as well, and much easier than trying to twist three together all at once. So here we can see we need to strip off about that much. Again, 14 gauge. I'm actually going to get rid of these wire nuts because that's not going to be big enough for joining two cables and these smaller wires. And to be efficient, you can see there's a lot of room here. So I'm actually going to clamp the second cable that's going to go to the next light in here as well. And then these romex cables are of course more like ribbons. They're kind of flat. I'm just trying to make sure that the flat sides are against each other. I push that in. So now you can see the insulation for both cables is just going through. So now we'll tighten down that strain relief on both of them. There we go. That's not going to go anywhere. All right, so now we just break these out into little groups. And so luckily they did solder this in so it's rigid, because otherwise if it's a braided wire like this, it's kind of hard to put into these WAGO clips. And I might take just a little bit more off of these two.
And those are the wires that go to the light.
Correct, these are the wires that go to the light's power supply. This is super easy with these. Just open all these little hinges, put a wire in, close it, and it's on. Put another wire in, close it. Put another wire in, close it. There's the ground. So then we could just push this in the box, and then now we can go to neutral. Push it in, close it, push it in. And you want to feel it bottom out so that the wire is actually touching the end of this little box. Close it, push it in, close it. There's our neutral. See how easy those ones are?
Yeah.
All right, and there's our hot connection. So we just stuff them all in the box, close it, and so we can connect this back to that light, and then we have this cable ready to go to the next one.
And here I'm just connecting the light to that power box again, and then securing the box to the joist with a couple screws.
Now you can adjust your temperature again. Okay, so now to the next one.
The process for wiring the next two lights is exactly the same as the second I just showed you. But the second cable from the last light goes down into the wall to the light switch. Here I've fed a few feet of the cable from the last light in the living room down into the wall, where I can fish it out through our hole for the junction box.
Make sure to label the cable away from the end that's going to have the insulation stripped off so we can keep these straight, because once we have three cables coming out of the wall, we won't know which is which.
So we wired up all the hallway lights and fed a cable down for that one, and then took the loose end of our cable coil and fed that down into the wall as well, because that will be our power cable.
We still have plenty of this reel left, and we'll just walk that back through that wall and to the box that we need to join it to.
So in our simple wiring diagram, we're now connecting this cable from the light switch box to this junction box that we identified as part of the lighting circuit. And that's already connected to the breaker panel.
Okay, Steve's gonna go turn off the breaker so we really know that it's this one. Yep, it's off.
With the power off, it's safe to open this box up, pull out the wires, and thread our new cable in from the bottom.
And now our cable has joined these others.
Now I'm removing all the wire nuts so we can connect in our new cable, and we'll be using these, which are very much like the WAGO connectors, but they don't have a lever, and once you put the wire in, it's very hard to get out.
And you can see in this clear box that the copper is pushed down into the end.
And you may end up having to untwist some of the wires with pliers, straighten them out, and cut them to the right length. So just like before, here we want to join all the neutral wires, all the hot wires, and because these wires were twisted together pretty well already, I just added our new ground wire, twisted it some more with the pliers, cut off the uneven end, and put on a big wire nut.
Okay, close this box up. Now downstairs to the hole in the wall.
Yep.
Okay, we're gonna start off and strip off a few inches from each of these. So now we're just gonna push one cable through each of these strain relief tabs. Just put power in on the left. And I'm just gonna push it in until it's just grabbed onto a bit of this insulation, the outer insulation. There we go. So now you can't pull it back out. And then we'll do the living room, cable wrestling. There we go, it's just poking through. And the entry hall. And I'm having to bend these wires towards the opening in the box so I can then feed it through. There we go. So we have our 3 sets of wires. So here is one of the dimmer switches, and it has 4 wires coming at the back. And the instructions say to cap this red and white one with a wire nut.
And that's for...
And I think this is used if it's a 3-way switch.
Okay.
So you have green for ground, and then the black and the red are actually interchangeable because they're either side of the switch. And so these interrupt the hot wire coming from the power going to the light.
So now I'm just stripping a little bit off the end of each of our wires. So first we're gonna start off connecting all the neutrals. The entry light is gonna go to one of the reds of the dimmer switches. So we can connect that with the 2-WAGO. I guess entryway makes sense on this side, huh? Then for our second dimmer switch, that red one is going to go to the black of the living room lights. Right now we have each dimmer switch connected to the hot wire of each set of lights. So now we have this hot wire coming from our power supply, and we need to connect it to the hot wire of each dimmer switch. So we'll use a 3-position WAGO connector. So now our dimmer switches have power.
It's quite the octopus of wires.
Yeah, so I'm gonna try to keep them separate still and as least tangled as possible because it makes it easier to fold them back into the box.
Yeah.
And now we just have to connect the earth.
Ground.
Yeah, the ground. I think we'll just twist together with the giant wire nut like you have. There we go, that's braiding nicely. And then we just need to get these in there. And then again, we just want this to wind around the same way. Do the same with this one. You can see this end is a bit of a mess, so we'll just snip off the end and use this really big wire nut, twist them all together. And there we go. So yeah, that does look like a lot of wires for this setup, but hopefully that made sense. So now I'm just gonna push the ground wires deep into the box. And these light switches, of course, have an upside and a downside. So I'm gonna fold the neutral back into the back.
Do we know which?
Yeah, now I need to see which one is which. Okay, so this one is the living room. So this is on the right. Just trying to push all these back into the box so that there's room for these to go in. Okay, look at that. So I think we need to break off a couple of these so they don't overlap like that. Just grab a big pair of pliers and wiggle. So before we put these on, we actually have to put the box in the wall because here's one of the screws for tightening it. And the way that this works, this is an old work box, meaning you can put it into old drywall that's already put in place because usually boxes are put in the wall first and then the drywall is put over. And as you start turning this screw, this tab lifts up and is stopped by this edge here. And as you tighten the screw, the tab moves closer and closer this way, pinching the drywall. All right. Oh, that's grabbing. That's so cool. It works so well.
We're not tightening these screws all the way because when we put on the faceplate, we'll have to wiggle those switches around a little bit.
The moment of truth?
Yes, so I like to turn them off.
All right, I'll go turn power on if
Okay.
it starts.
Okay.
Ta-da!
Hallelujah. Is that so satisfying?
Yes, very satisfying.
So the bottom end of the dimmer, so if you run it all the way down, so right now it's off, even though it should be somewhat dim. And while it's at this lowest setting, you can move this up until the lights just turn on to the lowest setting that you want. So you can play with that. And you want it until they just turn on at the lowest setting.
Probably there.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like that.
A little warmer.
It does look warmer. Yeah. Okay, what's next, Steve?
Living room.
Whoa! That changes the room so much.
It does.
So yeah, Steve's adjusting that little lower setting on the dimmer again with that little blue knob.
Maybe not that low. Like that?
Why does that last light look different? So on this one, it seems like it only has one LED working in it because the other ones look just like a complete glowing circle. And this one just has lighting from one edge. So we're gonna have to take this one back to the store. All right, it's 10:30, so we did manage to finish today. But overall, that was a successful day, even if it took us longer than we thought, which is usually the case for most projects. And we're very happy with the results.
This is the base piece for the screwless wall plate we're putting in. And to start, we're securing it with just one screw, because we need to make some adjustments here. As you can see, you can still access those larger screws that secure the light switches to the box in the wall. By loosening those off, you can adjust the position of the light switch to try and create an even reveal around the light switch in relation to that base plate.
So that is all right.
This part can be a bit fiddly, and you may need to hold the light switch in the position you want while you tighten down a screw. Once everything is lined up and you have those larger screws tightened down, you can put in the rest of the base plate screws. And then snap on the wall plate.
And those are supposed to be pointing down.
So if this happens to you, it's no big deal. Just use a flathead screwdriver to pop that wall plate off, rotate it 180, and snap it back on. And I think these types of wall plates look so good. As for the malfunctioning light, the store took it back no problems, and Steve plugged in the new one. And since these particular Canless lights are IC or insulation contact rated, it's okay to just cover them up with whatever insulation you have. Though a piece of batt insulation directly over each light could help reduce the amount of dust that could find its way down into the living room. And once you don't have to move those cables through the hole anymore, you should probably seal up that hole with some of this fire barrier sealant. This tube was expired, so I don't have any video of us doing that. And finally, we secured the cables in the attic to the joists with staples. And while local codes may vary, I believe that in general, you need to secure the cable within 12 inches anywhere it comes out of a box, and at least every 4.5 feet along its length. And make sure not to pound the staple in too hard, because you don't want to damage the cable beneath. You just want it snug enough so that it doesn't wiggle around. So that was the project. And here's the before and after.
So if you've made it through this whole video and still have some questions, I'd be very curious to know what those are. So please leave them down below. And some astute viewers may notice that we didn't exactly solve Steve's problem because we didn't place that light switch near his front door. And we actually had it closer to his dining room. And Steve said the way he'll deal with this is just by leaving those entryway lights on a little bit. But aside from that, he now has some very functional lighting in both his living room and his entryway. Finally, if this video has helped you at all, I'd appreciate it if you could hit that like button, and I'd love to hear about what your project was down below. So if you like videos like this, you might like this one here. That'd be really embarrassing if I fell through your ceiling.
Well, that's one way to get another video done.
In this video, we'll be repairing the human-shaped hole